The moment my son-in-law looked at me across that conference table and said, "Sign it, Helen, don't make this harder than it needs to be," every person in that room went completely still. But what none of them knew, not my daughter, not the mediator, not the young attorney who kept clearing his throat, was that I had been in that building before. The man sitting at the head of the table, the one they brought in as a neutral third party, had gone white the moment I walked through the door. He wasn't looking at my daughter. He wasn't looking at the papers. He was looking at me like someone who'd just seen a face from a dream they'd spent 30 years trying to forget. "I'm glad you're here. Stay with me until the end and tell me in the comments what city you're watching from." My name is Helen, and I've lived in the same house in Mill Haven, Ohio for 31 years. It's a craftsman bungalow on Sycamore Street with a wide front porch and a garden my late husband Arthur planted the spring after we moved in. Roses along the fence, black-eyed Susans near the steps, and one stubborn hydrangea that bloomed late every single year, no matter what Arthur tried. He used to say it was like a relative who always arrived after dessert, but somehow made the whole evening better just by showing up. Arthur died 4 years ago in November in that house, in our bedroom, holding my hand. After he was gone, I kept the garden going. I kept the bird feeders filled. I got up every morning at 6:30, made my coffee and the percolator Arthur gave me for our 25th anniversary, and I found reasons to be grateful. That is not a small thing. It takes work. Finding gratitude when the person who made your life make sense isn't there anymore. I should tell you about my daughter Claire. She was the kind of child who lit up every room she walked into, curious and funny and warm in a way that made strangers want to talk to her. When she brought home the man she said she was going to marry, I wanted to be happy for her. I tried. His name's Todd, and he was handsome in that pressed, polished way that always makes me a little uneasy, like a room that's been cleaned too fast before company arrives. He worked in commercial real estate, spoke in numbers, and never once in 3 years of holiday dinners asked me a single question about myself. Still, she loved him, so I made him welcome. I made him his plate at Thanksgiving. I sent cards on his birthday. I am a woman who believes you love the people your children love, even when it costs you something. The trouble started 8 months after Arthur's estate was settled. Claire called on a Tuesday evening, which was unusual. She normally called Sunday afternoons. When I heard her voice, too careful, like she'd rehearsed, I already felt it. The way your body knows before your mind does. "Mum," she said, "Todd and I have been talking. We think it might be time to have a conversation about the house." I set down my coffee mug. "What kind of conversation?" "Just a practical one. You're in a big place alone. That house has a lot of upkeep, and with the market the way it is right now." She paused. I heard Todd's voice in the background, low and prompting. "We think the smart move would be to sell while prices are still strong and use the equity to get you somewhere more manageable." Somewhere more manageable. I'd lived on Sycamore Street for 31 years. I'd sanded those hardwood floors myself. I knew which step on the staircase creaked second from the top. "I'm managing just fine," I said. "Mom." Her voice shifted into the tone I recognized as Todd's influence, slightly impatient, vaguely condescending, as if I were being unreasonable about something obvious. "We're talking about your future." They came the following Saturday. Todd walked through my house the way the man in the video I'd seen online walks through a house he'd already decided to sell, measuring with his eyes, making small sounds of mild disapproval. He poked at the window frame in the dining room and said something about deferred maintenance. He asked if the roof had been inspected recently. Claire trailed behind him, not quite looking at anything directly. I had made lemon pound cake. It sat on the counter, and nobody touched it. Todd sat down at my kitchen table, Arthur's table, the oak one we'd bought at an estate sale in 1998, and opened his laptop. He'd put together a presentation, an actual presentation with slides comparing assisted living facilities in the Tri-County area. One of them had a picture of elderly people doing water aerobics, smiling in a way that looked like they'd been told exactly how to smile. "This one has a shuttle service," Claire offered, pointing at the screen. "I don't need a shuttle service," I said. "I have a car. I have a license. I drove here from the grocery store this morning." "For now," Todd said. Those 2 words, "for now," like I was already a problem that hadn't fully presented itself yet. I told them I needed time to think. Todd said there wasn't a lot of time, that the market was cyclical and waiting would cost me equity. Claire said she just wanted what was best for me. I walked them to the door, watched their car pull out to the driveway, and then I stood in my kitchen for a long time, looking at the lemon pound cake. I thought about calling my friend Dorothy from church. I thought about calling my sister out in Portland. Instead, I went upstairs to the bedroom closet, to the shelf where Arthur kept his important papers in a fireproof box he'd bought at Lowe's the year he was diagnosed with his heart condition. He told me where the key was. I'd never had a reason to look. I found it that night. Inside the box, beneath his will and the deed to the house and our marriage certificate, was a manila envelope with my name on it in Arthur's handwriting, not typed, handwritten, in his careful engineer's print. "Helen, read when you're ready." I sat down on the edge of the bed. I read it 3 times. Arthur, it turned out, had been quietly building something for the last 15 years of his life. He grew up during a time when men of his background didn't talk about money. They just managed it carefully, without fanfare. He bought 2 rental properties in the late 90s, a duplex on the east side of Millhaven, and a 4-unit building 2 towns over in Carver Falls. He'd invested steadily in index funds. He'd taken out a whole life policy with a cash value neither of us ever touched. The letter explained all of it, with account numbers and the name of a financial advisor at a firm called Green Lake Wealth Management. The letter also said this: "I know you, Helen. You'd give every penny away before you'd spend it on yourself. I didn't tell you because I wanted you to have something that couldn't be argued away. Use this to stay free." There was a line at the bottom, almost an afterthought: "The duplex on Garfield Avenue. I believe Todd has been aware of it for some time. Be careful." I read that line 4 times. The next morning, I called Green Lake Wealth Management and asked for the advisor Arthur had named. Her name was Sylvia Chen, and when I told her I was Arthur Marsh's wife, she said, "Mrs. Marsh, I have been hoping you'd call." She drove to Millhaven the following week. She sat at Arthur's kitchen table, and she told me what I owned. The duplex on Garfield was fully occupied. The building in Carver Falls had 3 of 4 units rented. The investment accounts had grown significantly over the years. Arthur managed them. And there was something else, something Sylvia pulled from her briefcase with a careful, steady expression. "Your daughter and son-in-law contacted our office 6 months ago," she said. "They identified themselves as your power of attorney." "I never gave them power of attorney." "No," Sylvia said. "You did not, but someone submitted documentation claiming you had. We didn't process it. Arthur had left specific instructions about any future contact claiming to represent you, but I think you should know it was attempted." The room was very quiet. I could hear the hydrangea tapping against the kitchen window in the breeze. "Todd works in commercial real estate," I said slowly. "The duplex on Garfield Avenue," Sylvia said carefully, "is currently rented through a property management company. The management company is a subsidiary of a firm where your son-in-law serves as a part-time consultant." I thought about Arthur's letter. I believe Todd has been aware of it for some time. He'd been collecting information on my assets. While bringing me water aerobics brochures, he had been mapping what he could access. Sylvia and I talked for 3 hours. By the time she left, I had a plan. Not a revenge plan. I want to be clear about that. I'm a 67-year-old woman who goes to church on Sundays and tries to mean it when she says grace. I wasn't interested in punishing anyone. I was interested in being left alone in my own house and making sure my daughter understood the truth before she spent any more of her life following a man who was using her. The first step was straightforward. I contacted an estate attorney named Mr. Weston, older fellow, recommended by our family lawyer who had retired, and I had every document in order within 2 weeks. The house in my name, clear, a properly executed will with a trust structure Sylvia recommended, and a letter to Todd's attorney, because of course Todd had an attorney, informing them that any further contact regarding my property or finances should be directed to Mr. Weston. Todd called me himself the same evening. He was calm at first, professional. He said there'd been a misunderstanding and he hoped we could keep this civil. I told him I intended to keep it very civil, which was why I'd involved an attorney. Then he wasn't calm anymore. "You're making a mistake," he said. "Claire is your daughter. She's going to inherit that house eventually. We're just trying to plan accordingly." "The house is mine," I said. "While I'm living in it, I'll be the one making plans." "You're being irrational, Helen. You're emotional about this because of Arthur. Good night, Todd." I hung up. My hands were shaking, but I hung up. 2 days later, Claire came alone. She stood on my porch with her arms crossed and her eyes red at the edges, the way she used to look when she was small and had been crying and didn't want me to know. I opened the door and she came inside and we sat in the living room, and she said, "He told me you hired a lawyer to intimidate us." "I hired a lawyer to protect myself. From your own family." "Claire," I kept my voice steady, "did you sign documents claiming to be my power of attorney?" She looked at the floor. "Todd said it was standard, that it would make things easier to manage if something happened to you." "Nothing has happened to me, and I never agreed to any of that." Her jaw tightened. "He said you were confused about it, that you'd agreed verbally and then forgotten." I let that settle between us for a moment. "Do you believe that?" She didn't answer right away. That was its own kind of answer. I told her about the 6 months of calls to Sylvia's office, about the property management company, about the connection to Todd's consultancy. I watched her face as I laid it out, not with satisfaction because there was none. Watching your daughter realize she has been a tool in someone else's plan is one of the most sorrowful things a mother can experience. "I didn't know about the properties," she finally said. Her voice was very small. "I didn't know any of that was yours. Your father built that quietly, for me, so that no one could take it." She started to cry. Not the performed kind, the real kind, the ugly kind, the kind that comes from somewhere deep and has been waiting a long time. I moved to sit beside her. I am still her mother. Whatever else is true, I am still her mother. She stayed for 4 hours that day. She asked me questions she'd been afraid to ask for years, about Todd, about the way things had shifted after they married, about whether I'd ever told her father my concerns. I told her the truth. I also told her that the choices ahead of her were hers to make, and that I would not push her either direction. What I would do, I told her, was be here when she was ready. She went home that evening. I didn't know if she would tell Todd what we discussed, or if he would know how to answer her if she did. I sat on the porch until the streetlights came on, watching the garden, talking to Arthur in the way I do when I need to think out loud. "You were right about him," I said. "I just wish you'd been wrong." 3 weeks later, I got a phone call from a number I didn't recognize. The man on the other end said his name was Gerald Whitmore, and that he was a mediator and arbitration specialist, and that he'd been contacted by Claire and Todd's attorney about a dispute involving property and estate matters. He explained that both parties had agreed to pursue mediation before any formal litigation, and that my presence was requested at a session the following Thursday at his office in downtown Millhaven. I called Mr. Weston. He said the mediation request was legitimate, that I was not required to attend, but that it might be in my interest to do so, and that he would accompany me. We arrived at the Whitmore Mediation Group on a Thursday morning in March. The building was an older one on Court Street, the kind of solid brick construction that Millhaven does well, with high ceilings and the smell of old paper. Mr. Weston and I took the elevator to the third floor. I was wearing a grey wool blazer and the pearl earrings Arthur gave me on our 30th anniversary, and I was calmer than I had expected to be. The conference room had a long table and chairs on both sides. Todd was already there with a young attorney who looked like he was trying very hard to appear older. Claire sat beside Todd, her hands in her lap, not looking at me when I came in. And at the head of the table, preparing to open a leather folder, was the mediator. Gerald Whitmore. He looked up when I entered. I watched the colour leave his face. He stared at me the way you stare at something you can't quite make real, as though if he blinked I might resolve into someone else. His mouth opened slightly. He recovered himself quickly. He was a professional, and he knew how to manage his expression, but not before Todd's attorney noticed and frowned and said, "Mr. Whitmore, are you acquainted with—" "I apologize," Gerald said. His voice was professionally level, but I could hear the effort in it. "Let's begin." He looked at me one more time before he opened his folder, with an expression I couldn't fully name. Recognition, yes, but something underneath it that looked like relief. I did not know why. Not yet. The session lasted 3 hours. Todd's attorney made a case for the mediation to address what he called family estate planning concerns, which was a careful way of saying they wanted access to my property. He cited my age and what he described as the potential burden of property management on a woman living alone. He spoke about Claire's stake as an heir. Mr. Weston responded calmly. Every document was in order. Every property was properly titled. There was no legal basis for any claim. Todd interrupted twice. Gerald Whitmore silenced him both times without raising his voice. At one point, Todd's attorney suggested that I might benefit from a guardian ad litem, someone appointed by a court to oversee my financial decisions. He said it gently, with a practiced expression of concern. I looked at him and I said, clearly and without heat, "I have a financial advisor, an estate attorney, and 37 years of household budgeting behind me. I appreciate the suggestion." Gerald Whitmore made a small sound that might have been the beginning of a laugh, quickly suppressed. We broke for lunch. Mr. Weston went to get coffee. Claire excused herself. Todd stepped into the hallway with his attorney. Gerald Whitmore walked around the table and stopped in front of me. "I owe you something," he said. I looked at him. He was in his early 60s, with the careful bearing of a man who had spent his career in rooms where precision mattered. But in that moment he looked like something less formal, something younger. 1991, he said. "You were working at the probate court on Jefferson. You were a file clerk." I felt the memory surface slowly, the way things do when they've been sitting quiet for a long time. The probate court on Jefferson. I had worked there for 3 years when Arthur and I were first married, while he finished his engineering certifications. "There was a young law student," I said slowly. "He was doing a practicum. He'd lost a brief, dropped a whole folder on the stairs and got them out of order. The supervising attorney was coming in an hour, and he was." "Absolutely panicking," Gerald said, "yes." I remembered him then. Thin, serious face, ink on his hands. I had stayed 40 minutes past my shift to help him reorganize everything. I'd shown him the filing system. He'd thanked me 3 times and I'd told him to get some sleep. "You told me the law was worth fighting for," Gerald said. "You said if I believed that, I shouldn't let one bad afternoon make me forget it." I hadn't remembered saying that. People say things, and they move on, and they don't know what stays. "I almost quit," he said. "I would have that week if not for that afternoon. I've been thinking about it for months. My father wanted me to take over his insurance business. It would have been easier." He paused. "I became a mediator because I believed in finding resolution without destruction. That's what you modeled for me that day, a person who stays steady when things are chaotic. I have thought about that afternoon more times than you could know." I sat with that for a moment. "The case today," I said carefully, "your ruling, is entirely based on the evidence," he said, with a firmness that left no room for doubt. "Your son-in-law has no legal claim and no evidentiary basis for any of his assertions. The documentation your attorney submitted is thorough and unambiguous." He looked at me levelly. "But I need you to know that I would recuse myself right now if I believed my personal regard for you in any way compromised my judgment. I don't believe it does. I believe it confirms it." We returned to the table when the others came back. Gerald Whitmore summarized the mediation findings in precise, measured language. There was no legal basis for any claim on my property. The submission of unauthorized power of attorney documents had been noted and referred to the County Bar Association for review of Todd's attorney's involvement. Claire's rights as a future heir were fully preserved under my existing will and trust, which was her mother's choice to make, not a court's. Todd stood up. His face was flushed and his voice was tight, but he was losing and he knew it, and a man like Todd knows the difference between a fight he can win and a room he should leave. "This isn't over," he said. "Yes," Gerald said simply, "it is." They left. Claire didn't follow immediately. She stood by her chair for a moment, looking at me across the table. "I told him last night," she said. Her voice was quiet. "About the properties, about the management company, about the calls to Sylvia's office. I asked him to explain." "What did he say?" "He said I was being manipulated by you." She swallowed. "I told him I thought it was the other way around." I walked around the table and I hugged my daughter for the first time in longer than I want to count. She held on, and I let her, and we stood in that conference room in downtown Millhaven while the March sun came in through the windows. The weeks after were not easy. A marriage unraveling is painful regardless of the reasons, and Claire moved through it with a grief I recognized, the loss not just of a person but of the future she'd believed in. She stayed with me for a while, sleeping in her old room, slowly refilling it with boxes of her own things. We talked. For the first time in years we actually talked. She told me that Todd had isolated her. Gradually, without her noticing, the way a tide pulls you out slowly enough that you don't realize how far you've gone until you look back at the shore. She'd given up her job at the landscape architecture firm. She'd stopped seeing her college friends. She'd handed over their finances to him completely because he said it was more efficient. I kept thinking if I just went along a little more, agreed a little more, it would feel like partnership, she said one evening. We were sitting on the porch in the spring dark, but partnership was never what he wanted. What did he want? She thought about it. Control, she said, and access. To me, to my family's money, to whatever he could find. Arthur had seen it from the beginning. I thought about the letter in the fireproof box, the line about Todd. "I miss Arthur every day. I miss him in the mornings, in the garden, in the particular silence of the house after 9 o'clock. But I have come to understand that loving someone means continuing the work they started. He spent 15 years quietly building a protection around me that I never knew I needed. The least I could do was use it." 6 months after the mediation, I received a letter from a woman named Patricia Osei. No, wait, I need to pause here because I want to tell this next part carefully. I had started going to a community group at the public library in Millhaven. It was held on Wednesday evenings, organized by a social worker named Susan, and it was for women over 55 who were dealing with housing insecurity or family legal disputes. I had found it through a flyer at Mr. Jati Weston's office, and I attended mostly out of curiosity and partly because I thought it might help someone else to hear what I'd been through. What I found there were women whose situations were harder than mine, women who hadn't had a Sylvia Chen waiting at the end of a phone call, women who hadn't had an Arthur building a quiet safety net for 30 years, women who had signed the papers because no one told them they didn't have to, women who had handed over their houses because their children's lawyers were more persuasive than their own doubt. I started driving women to their attorney appointments. I started reviewing documents with them, explaining what I could, flagging what needed professional eyes. I partnered with Mr. Weston, who began offering a monthly pro bono consultation specifically for the group. I talked to Sylvia about putting together a financial literacy afternoon for women who had never been the ones managing their own money. Claire joined me. She brought her landscape architecture, I to a community garden project we started in the small yard behind the library branch, a place where the women in the group could come and do something with their hands and talk to each other and feel useful rather than discarded. We called it the third act garden, because that's what this is, not the ending. The third act. Todd's legal license to practice real estate in Ohio was suspended pending an ethics investigation related to the fraudulent power of attorney filing. I did not celebrate. I noted it the way you note a storm that has passed, with relief rather than satisfaction. Claire filed for divorce on a Tuesday in October, in the same courthouse where I had filed clerk work as a young bride. She called me from the parking lot afterward. She didn't say anything for a moment. Then she said, "I feel lighter than I've felt in 6 years." "That's the beginning," I told her. "It only gets clearer from here." I still get up at 6:30. I still make my coffee in Arthur's percolator. I still talk to him in the evenings on the porch when the light falls a certain way through the hydrangea, the one that always blooms late, the one that does it on its own schedule, no matter what anyone thinks about it. Last week, a woman named Beverly— no, I can't use that name, it's in the file— a woman in the group named Rosa asked me what I thought the hardest part of all of it had been. She was in the middle of her own fight, and she was tired the way you get tired when you've been careful for too long. I thought about it. The hardest part, I told her, was the moment I believed, just for a minute, that they might be right, that I was too old, too alone, too much trouble. She nodded. She knew that moment. "Because once you stop believing that," I said, "they don't have anything left to use." There is a difference between a woman who is old and a woman who is done. I have learned that deeply now. Age is the passage of time. Done is a surrender I have no intention of making. If something in this story sounds familiar, if you have stood in your own kitchen looking at your own untouched pound cake, wondering how the people you loved became strangers, I want you to know that the folder in the fireproof box might not exist for everyone. Arthur was extraordinary in his quiet way, but the steadiness, the refusal, the walking into that conference room with your pearls on and your attorney beside you and the truth in your briefcase, that is available to any of us. You are not too old to know what belongs to you. You are not too alone to find help, and you are never so far out that you cannot find your way back to shore. Leave me a comment below and tell me where you're watching from. I read every single one. I keep thinking about the fireproof box, the way it sat on that shelf in the closet for 4 years after Arthur died, plain grey metal, a Lowe's sticker still on the side, and I walked past it every single day without opening it. I wasn't ready, and maybe I didn't need to be ready until I did. What I've come to understand is that the things that happen to us are rarely accidents. Todd didn't stumble into our lives. He found Claire because he was looking for something, and she was warm and trusting and loved her parents, and that made her useful to him. Every step he took, the presentation at my kitchen table, the calls to Sylvia's office, the forged documents, each one followed logically from the one before it. Greed doesn't erupt. It builds quietly, the same way good things build, only in the wrong direction. And I was not blameless in how long it took me to see it. I wanted Claire to be happy. I told myself that my discomfort with Todd was just a mother being difficult, being territorial, being old-fashioned. I mistook my own instincts for selfishness. That cost us years. I won't pretend otherwise. What Arthur gave me, and I don't mean the properties or the accounts, I mean the deeper thing, was a model of how to do right by someone, even when they aren't watching. He built that safety net not for recognition, not for gratitude, but because it was the correct thing to do. That is what real integrity looks like. It's quiet. It doesn't announce itself. It just holds when everything else is shaking. And Gerald, a young man panicking on a courthouse staircase in 1991, ink on his hands, close to giving up. I didn't know I was doing anything significant that afternoon. I just stayed a little longer because it seemed like the right thing to do, and because I could see that he genuinely cared about the work and just needed someone to show him it wasn't ruined yet. That one choice, made without any expectation of return, became the thread that ran through 30 years and showed up exactly when I needed it. That's not magic. That's how it works. The kindness you put into the world keeps moving after you've forgotten you sent it. The thing that saved me in the end wasn't Arthur's money. It was the willingness to learn, to call Sylvia, to sit across from her for 3 hours and let her show me what I didn't know, to stop pretending I had it all handled just because asking for help felt like weakness. Real intelligence isn't what you already know. It's the honesty to recognize the edges of it and the courage to reach past them. And then there's the matter of sitting across from Todd at that table, with his attorney and his prepared arguments, and his certainty that I was too old and too sentimental to push back. Staying in that chair, calm, was the hardest thing I did. Not because I wasn't afraid. I was. But I had made a decision about who I was, about what Arthur's work deserved, about what I owed my daughter even when she didn't know she needed it, and I was not going to let fear rewrite that decision for me. That kind of steadiness doesn't come from certainty. It comes from having decided ahead of time that you are worth defending. I am 67 years old, I tend a garden, I drive myself to the grocery store, and I have learned, later than I would have liked, but not too late, that the most powerful thing a woman in my position can do is simply refuse to be written off.